You know, when we think of the Napoleonic Wars, we picture these grand spectacles, right? Cannons booming, cavalry charging across huge battlefields. But behind all that, another war was being fought, a secret war, waged with whispers, codes, and some seriously deadly deception. So you have to imagine Europe back then, in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. It was just a time of constant, relentless conflict. A historian, Nick Brazil, put it perfectly. He said the continent was so pockmarked with numerous wars that it created fertile soil for the craft of espionage. I mean, it was a chaotic era, just the perfect environment for a hidden world of spies to really flourish. And these weren't your typical spies from the movies. We're talking about real-life aristocrats, artists, smugglers, even adventurers. All of them were players in what was basically the most dangerous game in Europe, where one tiny mistake could literally cost you your head. Okay, to really get a handle on this shadow war, let's start by meeting some of the key players who were working to bring Napoleon's empire down from the inside. Our first character is a true master of intrigue, Louis-Alexandre de Launay, the Comte d'Intrigue. They actually called him the Man of Mirrors, and for a very good reason. His loyalties seemed to shift in the blink of an eye. So get this, he started out as a huge supporter of the French Revolution. But then, as the Reign of Terror kicked in and the aristocracy became a target, he did a complete 180. He became one of the most important spies for the exiled French monarchy. And this brings us to the biggest mystery of his entire career. In 1797, he's caught, red-handed, with incriminating papers. He's then interrogated by Napoleon Bonaparte himself. You'd think execution was a sure thing, but then he's somehow allowed to escape. How? Well, the answer probably isn't about politics, but about personal connections. You see, his wife was a good friend of Napoleon's wife, Josephine. It seems a pretty powerful friendship might just have saved his life. D'Intrigue's story really drives home the constant danger these agents were in. It was a life that so often ended in violence. But, not every spy met such a grim end. Let's take the incredibly resourceful Mrs. Biggs. She played the game just as well, but her story had a completely different outcome. Mrs. R.C.W. Biggs was this steely English woman who had a real knack for espionage. She was fluent in French, and she traveled all across enemy territory, just posing as a local. All the while, she was gathering vital intelligence on everything from troop movements to the state of the economy and smuggling those reports back to London. It was an unbelievably risky thing to do, but our cover was so good, she was never, ever discovered. So, with all these effective agents working against him, Napoleon obviously needed his own network of spies. Who were these people? Who were his eyes and ears across the continent? All right, let's switch sides now and take a look at Napoleon's team. You'll see his agents operated by hiding in some of the most unexpected places. Now, Napoleon's most valuable agent wasn't some high-born aristocrat or a general. No, he was Karl Schulmeister, a man who started his career not in the halls of power, but on the shadowy borders of France and Germany as a common smuggler. His journey is just incredible. He actually started out spying for Austria before a French general flipped him. And man, was that a good move for the French. His intelligence was so critical that it led directly to a massive, decisive French victory at the Battle of Ulm. But when Napoleon's empire finally crumbled, Schulmeister's grand adventure was over. He just sort of faded back into obscurity and lived out the rest of his life as a simple tobacconist. Then, there was an agent who was maybe even more subtle, and definitely more mysterious, known only as El de Langastre. This guy didn't carry a pistol. His greatest weapon was a paintbrush. And what a cover it was. It was perfect. As a popular society portrait painter in England, de Langastre had intimate access to the British elite. Just imagine the secrets that might be whispered during those long, quiet portrait sittings with members of the Royal Society or high-ranking government officials. Any little scrap of information, especially about the British Navy, would have been absolute gold for his bosses back in Paris. So beyond these individual spies, both sides were scrambling to create actual organized intelligence networks. But even as they tried to professionalize the world of spying, some of their methods stayed, well, bizarrely unconventional. Over in Britain, the guy trying to wrangle all this chaos was Evan Nepean. He was essentially the nation's spy master. Think of him as the M of his day. And he was responsible for recruiting agents and building Britain's first real intelligence service. But man, this was tough work. For every successful agent he had, like the diplomat Francis Drake, Nepean had to deal with turncoats he could never fully trust. And then there were the unreliable liabilities, like George Parker, an actor who apparently couldn't stop drinking and bragging about his secret missions. Not great. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, shows the sheer weirdness of espionage in this era, quite like the story of a French agent known only as Tarare. Okay, so Tarare had this truly unique medical condition, a completely insatiable appetite. The man could literally swallow anything. So some French general had what he thought was a brilliant idea. Let's weaponize his stomach. The plan was to have him swallow messages inside a little wooden box. His one and only mission was a complete and utter disaster. He was caught immediately, beaten, and they even put him through a mock execution. The Prussians only let him go after they finally recovered the box and discovered the message inside was just a worthless dummy. Unsurprisingly, his career as a spy was very, very short. But, maybe the most fascinating part of this whole story isn't what we know. It's what we don't know. Yeah, the very nature of their secret work means their life stories don't just have neat little endings. They're filled with gaps, contradictions, and mysteries that were basically buried right along with them. Think about the Comte d'Entraigues, the man of mirrors. He was murdered by a servant in 1812. But was it really just a simple act of revenge by an angry employee? Or was it a political assassination, a final move by Napoleon to silence a lifelong enemy for good? And what about our artist spy, de Langastre? He supposedly died in 1799. But then, a man matching his exact description and profession just mysteriously reappears years later. So did he fake his own death to avoid being caught, only to pop back up when he thought the coast was clear? And this leaves us with a final thought. For all of these people, we will probably never know the full story. Because in the end, their greatest secret, the one they all took to the grave, was the complete truth of their own lives. Their ultimate trick was making sure that final chapter could never truly be written.